but unfortunately, it is a radical with electrons sitting in a degenerate orbital and will not give you a spectrum on its own. And it's very unstable and short-lived. But if you now generate nitric oxide in vivo, for example, you can give a septic shock to mice and then inject the mice with an iron 2 compound, iron 2 diethyl dithiocarbamate, which is a square planar ion complex. The nitric oxide becomes the fifth ligand and takes an electron from iron 2, makes it iron 3 and paramagnetic. And that electron will start giving rise to a hyperfine pattern from the nitric oxide nitrogen. And one can actually calculate the quantity of nitric oxide that is produced as a result of biological shock that happens in the animal. And there are a large number of spin trapping agents available for nitric oxide and also for other radicals which are generated by ultraviolet or other reactions, antioxidants and oxidative stress, etc. One can now work on large number of in vivo systems looking at free radical generation during cardiac ischemia, etc. by injecting the spin trap into the animal, putting the animal in a low frequency machine and generating the radical and studying them with respect to what is the generation, what radical was generated, what is the quantity of it, etc. So a large number of free radical in vivo reactions can be followed by low frequency EPR spectroscopy and imaging. Of course, EPR imaging is a fairly recent technique. It's only in vogue for the last 20 years. And we will talk about it if we have time. Where am I now? How much more time I have when I... Can you all hear me? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Another
Sunil.
10, 15. I started around 6:30, 5:30. I will go up to 6:30.
Yeah,
no.
please.
Is it allowed?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll try to
I think another 10, 15, 10 minutes you can.
Okay. I'll try to finish it in 10 minutes.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So MRI this is now from spectroscopy into spatial distribution of spins. That is magnetic resonance imaging. It's used for anatomic imaging, diagnostic radiology, functional imaging of the brain, blood oxygen level dependent imaging, etc. The two people who got Nobel Prize for MRI is Paul Lauterbur and Mansfield. The first discovery of MRI on fruits was actually presented in the Bombay ISMAR conference in 1974 by Lauterbur. And I distinctly remember Professor Chandrakumar, myself, and one other student, Chandrasekhar, listening to him when he first presented the MRI of apples and oranges. And then we had lunch with him in a Chinese restaurant. I remember very, very clearly. Later on, when he got the Nobel Prize, I congratulated him. He remembered, yes, I remember we went to the Chinese restaurant in Bombay. So he's no more, unfortunately, but this epoch-making discovery, which has completely changed diagnostic radiology, looking at tissue imaging, soft tissue imaging, etc., where X-rays may not give you vivid description. And these two people were simultaneously working on imaging of protons. And one was in England, Nottingham. The other is, when he did that, he was at New York State University at Albany. So these are now some pictures that one can take by applying gradients in presence of a magnetic field which is constant. Your frequency is the same in all places. The moment you start superimpose a gradient on the top of the DC magnetic field, frequencies of resonance change according to the actual change in magnetic field, therefore according to the location, because the gradient will change the extra magnetic field from the gradient coil, will tell you what is the shift in frequency due to the location. Therefore, superimposing magnetic field gradients on a static field will help us encode the frequencies of resonance in terms of the space. So spatial encoding of frequencies comes as a result of supplying three-dimensional gradients on a highly homogeneous magnetic field. This is just a very, very simple elementary picture. You got three spots, three tubes of water in the magnetic field, uniform magnetic field, a single line. You now superimpose a gradient. The magnetic field is not affected in the center, but it is higher on the right-hand side and lower on the left-hand side. And therefore, the three tubes, when you get the resonance, are now one-dimensional image has come out, where the amplitude depends upon the amount of spins and the position depends upon the relative positioning of these tubes. So this is the frequency encoding of space. And these are now special coils, it's called the gradient coils. Each one of these coils is capable of changing the Zeeman field, dc by dx, dc by dy, dc by dx. So x, y, z displacement will change a corresponding Zeeman field. Zeeman field is most important for us for the law of frequency. Therefore, using these kind of gradients, three-dimensional gradients, it is possible for us to get the frequency shifted inside a object depending upon the actual distribution of the spins inside that object. And it is also possible to apply a one-dimensional gradient, and therefore the frequencies will depend upon the location. It is possible for us to apply a gradient along z-axis, and then we can start selecting a frequency range which will select a particular slice. So it is possible for us, at least in a frequency-wise, take a slice from the top of the head to the bottom of the leg in hundreds of slices by applying a gradient, linear gradient, and then putting limited selective frequencies. So it is possible to instrumentally, without putting a knife to the system, slice it out in terms of millimeter slices or even better slices. And these are now frequencies and gradients which will give rise to what is known as the K-space. Fourier transform of that will lead to image, and the image contrast will depend upon the relaxation time T1, relaxation time T2, and also the proton density in the given system. Higher the density, higher will be the intensity, and then higher the dynamics, etc., depending upon the actual relaxation time of a given system. Like liquids will have a long correlation time and short relaxation time, while solids may have a fat, for example, will have a short relaxation time because of a long correlation time. These are now different pictures of the transverse slice of a head, where you can see this is relaxation T1 weighted, proton density spectrum, T2 weighted. All these will give an idea to the radiologist to say something about whether there is a cancer there or whether there is a cerebrospinal leaking out, things like this. The consistency, tissue density, and tissue quality can be assessed from the contrast. This now is a spectrum of a person right from his stem cell at the end of the brain up to the bottom, and all of them are taken by a series of coils which are called array coils, and every image information from each one of the coil is taken later on and combined to produce a beautiful spectrum of the complete spinal cord coming from the end of the brain stem to the bottom of the stem. This, for example, is a picture taken of something like a trimester, in the trimester of a baby inside the womb. Again, it's a two-dimensional sliced image across the womb of the lady, and it is taken with fast imaging techniques, and you can see the kind of gymnastics the child does inside the womb. See that. Additional information comes as a result of what is known as measuring the so-called diffusion constant tensor of proton or water in the brain. For example, the neuronal connectivity via synaptic information transfer takes place via the electronic conduction of protons in the brain. And therefore, if we can have an idea about the motion of proton or water proton inside the brain is a tensorial quantity, meaning it has got a unique fast axis of transfer of diffusion movement, and something transfers to it. So you have the so-called diffusion tensor, being usually about axial, having a long axis through which the diffusion takes place fast. It is possible to apply diffusion onto the NMR spectroscopy using diffusion applied along various directions of a given system. We can actually measure the diffusion tensor of water, and then after the diffusion tensor has been derived from a series of experiments, we can look at the unique axis of this diffusion tensor and connect them. When you do that, what you get is a so-called neuronal fiber tracking, and that will give the neurosurgeon and the neurologist an idea about the kind of connectivity during the various synaptic transmission of information. You can see here this is the right and the left striatum, somewhat symmetric, and these are the way in which the diffusion tensor, these are color-coded in terms of the diffusion tensor values, so-called approximate diffusion constant. Again, there is one more imaging that is it was originally done by Japanese, I forget the name, functional imaging, that the blood flow in brain, for example, is affected by the brain activity. Any motor activity you do will have a certain command coming from a certain location in the brain. So all your activities, physical activities like twitching, folding your hand, opening your hand, any exercise you do, physical exercise, will have to have a command coming from the brain. And in that region, oxygen will be depleted during the action, because when you have some activity, energy is required. So oxygen will be depleted. So the hemoglobin of the blood in that region will be deoxygenated. Deoxygenated hemoglobin is actually paramagnetic, while the oxyhemoglobin is diamagnetic. And therefore, the paramagnetic hemoglobin containing blood will have a local magnetic field which will scatter the signal, because any magnetism will try to give you an inhomogeneity in that location, and therefore the signals will be somewhat scattered and lower in intensity. So one can perform a brain image when the patient is doing an activity, and then take one more image when the patient is not doing anything or remaining dormant. The difference between the two spectra will precisely locate what kind of a location in the striatum of the brain where this command originates. In other words, the functional aspects of the brain can be mapped out completely as to which particular, like for example, speech comes from a certain area, motor activity comes from another area, and therefore, after completely mapping out the brain, usually there will be a similarity in all mammals, and that particular activity is very important for the neurosurgeon before doing a surgery of a tumor in a brain, because he can tell the patient, yes, I'm going to remove a certain tumor from your right striatum, but after that has been removed, you will have some problem with respect to language speeches. Your speech will be bad, or your twitching of the right hand will not take place, because right hand will have left striatum connectivity and left hand will have a right striatum connectivity. And if there is going to be a certain injury to a certain part of the brain, one will be able to caution and also make sure that the neurosurgeon does not remove some critical portions of the brain during a brain surgery. And therefore, this functional imaging, which is done in a big way by Camille Ugerbill in Minnesota, has been a complete mapping out of the brain function in terms of so-called functional imaging. It's also called blood oxygen level dependent contrast, because functional imaging is nothing but looking at blood flow, blood oxygen consumption inside various locations of the brain. Well, there are large number. I'm going to leave this because 10 minutes only Vinay has given me. So let me now go fast. It is also possible to use certain, in the case of LMR, imaging is done with the water proton, which is plenty, 55 molar. If you want to do ESR imaging, you have to introduce free radicals into the animal. And what is introduced is this particular molecule that you get here. It's called the Tittle Oxo 63 generated by Nycomed. Now it's the property of GE Healthcare. This has got a carbon attached to 3 phenyl groups, and all these 3 phenyl groups are substituted by oxygen, sulfur, etc. All of them are non-magnetic. And so this fan blade-like carbon center, where it just got 1 electron in the unused pi orbital, is very, very narrow. This gives you a line of hardly about 20 milligauss line width, very narrow, like electrons in solids. So this particular liquid is non-toxic, remains in the animal for about 30 to 40 minutes without any problem, and gets eliminated. It's non-toxic. So one can introduce this into animal via tail vein cannulation intravenously and start putting gradients and measure ESR spectroscopy and do Fourier imaging. When you do this, of course, the instrument that we constructed. What you see here is the image of a liver of a mouse and the 2 kidneys. And you can also look at this image as a function of relaxation delay, and you can find out from the relaxation time the liver is highly hypoxic while the kidney is highly oxygenated. And here you can see the animal sitting inside a coil, and tail vein cannulation is done with a Tittle radical. After doing a 3-dimensional imaging using full face encoding, it is possible to slice millimeter slices and look at the oxygen heterogeneity in tumor. It's actually a tumor leg containing an SCC tumor, squamous cell carcinoma tumor, and this is a normal leg. The normal leg is fully oxygenated, while the tumor has a strong areas of lack of oxygen, hypoxic zones. Hypoxic zones are extremely resistant to radiation therapy, and therefore there are ways and means of putting a certain person having a cancer in a hyperbaric chamber, oxygenated him so that the tumors get oxygenated, and then when you use gamma rays or X-rays for killing the tumor, it is more than 100, almost 95% more effective than simply hitting the tumor when it is hypoxic. So these are now being used in cancer treatment with radiation to monitor before and after the oxygenation of tissues. And this is an example of a tumor having hypoxic zone, allowing the rat to breathe carbogen, which is 95% oxygen and 5% carbon dioxide. It immediately oxygenates that particular tumor. So animal models have been used for looking at. Okay, this is now additional NMR, ESR imaging, NMR imaging, ESR imaging techniques which are efficient by way of polarization transfer. ORASER imaging, this is Albert ORASER, who discovered the enhancement of nucleus signals in presence of electron, like for example, the lithium NMR resonance was very highly enhanced when you could transfer magnetization from the outer electron to the lithium nucleus. Originally, the paper, of course, was rejected. Later on, they apologized and accepted the paper. He should have gotten Nobel Prize. Unfortunately, he is no more. He was given a prize by Presidential Medal of Honor by Bill Clinton. And this is a spectrometer where we transfer magnetization from electron to proton at a field of only about 15 millitesla. I mean, 15 millitesla, remember. In 15 millitesla, we get images which are just like you did work in a 15 Tesla. 10 to the power 4 or 10 to the power 3 times more sensitivity enhancement. This is the image of a mouse bearing tumor in one of the legs, taken under ordinary conditions of low frequency ESR and low frequency NMR, 15 millitesla NMR. And then this one is done in presence of irradiation of electron after injecting the trickle radical into the mouse and then transferring magnetization from the electron to the nucleus. And what you could get is a beautiful spectrum of its tumor leg and the 2 kidneys. And then it is possible also to make the mouse breathe oxygen and breathe less oxygen, and you can see lighting up and lighting off of the various tissues because of the ORASER transfer. It's also possible to look at the oxygen distribution in various tumors and also monitor them as a function of treatment. These are breast cancer cells and tumor, telling that the tumor has highly hypoxic zones, and then one can oxygenate with carbogen. And this I'm going to stop here because this is the topic our keynote address speaker, so I will not touch them. So let me all go. These are actually certain spectra, hyperpolarized helium, neon NMR, and there is no time to go through this. We can just one example of hyperpolarized spectrum of urea, 13 carbon spectrum in natural abundance. It took 65 hours to get this noisy spectrum after polarization transfer from electron to urea. The technique we will see. And this is spectrum with the signal noise ratio and done in one shot. 1 second spectrum, 65-hour spectrum. Difference is one is hyperpolarized, the other one is unpolarized. Okay, we're going to stop like this, and I don't have time. These are actually angiogram of carbon-13 after hyperpolarization.
Yes, sir.
So multimodality imaging, one can combine X-ray, PET, CT, EPR, MRI, etc. to get a variety of information. I have not touched solid-state NMR. I need to do one more preliminary talk. And membrane proteins and solid-state NMR, magic angle spinning, and so on and so on and so on and so on and so on. I apologize for the initial goof. Either my PC or my brain was not working. I'm again thankful to the Magnetic Resonance Society of Kerala for giving this inaugural address opportunity. And I wish the society every success in its endeavors, and whatever possible from the NMRS Society of India, which is headquartered in Bangalore, and I am the current president. We will do all the help that we can for the society in Kerala. With this, I sincerely and thank you, all the people involved in this, for giving me this honor and opportunity. Thank you very much. You have a nice evening. Sorry about cutting into the keynote speaker's time. I'm sure she will be given enough time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you for. Am I audible?
Yes, you're clear. Very clear.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for the very wonderful lecture. And because of the shortness of time, we are sorry that we have to cut it out. You don't get the full
No,
one.
it's fine. It's fine. It's my mistake. I cannot. You don't have to apologize. It's my mistake because it's beyond the scope of the society to do anything, and I am goofing around with my laptop. I'm sorry.
Sorry, sir. Sir, could you officially, I request you officially to inaugurate the
Oh, yes. Right. Yeah, it is my pleasure.
our society.
Can I do it now?
Yeah, please.
Okay. To all the people who are connected with this online system and to all the other people, it is my pleasure and privilege to inaugurate the Magnetic Resonance Society of Kerala on this auspicious evening. And I wish the society a grand success in all its endeavors. We have already listened to the vision and the mission of the society. I hope the society is able to definitely achieve all its vision and mission. And all the people who are in this field in the country also should contribute and help the society come up in its endeavors. So once again, very happy to inaugurate the Magnetic Society of Kerala, and once again grateful to people who gave me this opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite Dr. Paulson Matthew, St. Thomas College, Thrissur, to introduce the keynote speaker.
Can everyone switch off their mic, please?
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Today we have with us Dr. Christy George from Pennsylvania State University, USA, to deliver the keynote address. Dr. Christy George studied chemistry, BSc from Mahatma Gandhi University, Kottayam, MSc and MPhil from Cochin University of Science and Technology. In 2011, Dr. Christy obtained a PhD in NMR spectroscopy and imaging from Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, under the supervision of Professor N. Chandrakumar. After obtaining PhD, Dr. Christy continued in IIT Madras as a research associate and young scientist until 2014. In 2014, Dr. Christy joined MIT, Cambridge, USA as a postdoc fellow. Presently, Dr. Christy is working as an assistant research professor at the Department of Chemistry, Pennsylvania State University, USA. In 2012, Dr. Christy received the prestigious Langmuir Prize for the best thesis in physical and theoretical chemistry from IIT Madras. Dr. Christy has more than 50 research publications in high-impact international journals and contributed many books, book chapters, and delivered many talks in conferences. Today, Dr. Christy will discuss dynamic nuclear polarization methods for sensitivity enhancement in NMR spectroscopy, a tool or a process of transferring electron spin polarization to nuclear speeds. On behalf of the Magnetic Resonance Society of Kerala, I invite Dr. Christy to deliver the keynote address. Dr. Christy, please.
Thank you. Professor Subramanian, you are still presenting. Can you please exit? Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank all the organizers for giving me this opportunity to present my work. I'll be talking about dynamic nuclear polarization, which is often referred to as DNP, DNP enhanced NMR spectroscopy. NMR spectroscopy is widely used for the structural characterization and studying the properties of molecules ranging from small organic molecules to big biomolecules like proteins. The advantage NMR spectroscopy has over other spectroscopic techniques is its resolution. Usually the NMR line widths will be less than a hertz, and which means that even minor changes in the chemical environment will be reflected either in the chemical shift or in the coupling patterns, and we can clearly identify the structure of molecules just by looking at the NMR spectrum, either the 1D or multidimensional NMR spectrum. However, the drawback of NMR is its poor sensitivity. The sensitivity of NMR is often referred to as represented in signal to noise ratio and is proportional to a number of factors, including the magnetogyric ratio, which is an inherent property of the nuclei and we don't have much to do, and the magnetic field strength, temperature, etc. Over the years, there were many attempts to improve the sensitivity of basic NMR spectroscopy, mainly by developing new and better instrumentation, going to higher and higher field. Nowadays, magnetic field strengths up to 28 Tesla, corresponding to a proton resonance frequency of 1.2 gigahertz are available. And also there are new pulse sequences that are developed to which are more efficient than the older pulse sequences. However, the sensitivity enhancement that can be achieved by all those methods are nothing when compared to what can be achieved using a technique known as dynamic nuclear polarization. In DNP, we are achieving a sensitivity enhancement by transferring the polarization from electron to a nucleus. How does that improve the sensitivity? Because the electron has a magnetogyric ratio which is 658 times higher than that of the protons and much more when we compare to other nuclei. So we can, in principle, get a sensitivity enhancement of 658 for protons, the theoretical maximum. However, if we consider a moderate enhancement of, say, 100 at 500 megahertz, this will correspond to a sensitivity that can be achieved this sensitivity is actually even more than what can be achieved on a 10 gigahertz spectrometer, which of course does not exist. Now, to achieve this electron to nuclear polarization, we often irradiate the sample with a dope the sample with dope the sample with a radical which has a paramagnetic free electron, which can give rise to an EPR spectrum, and then irradiate the sample with microwave so that the EPR transition is excited, and then transfer the polarization from the electron spin to the nuclear spin. And this polarization transfer occurs via 4 different mechanisms. They are Overhauser effect, solid effect, Frost effect, and thermal mixing. Now, DNP can be performed both in solution state as well as in solid state. Overhauser effect is the mechanism that leads to sensitivity enhancement in solution state, whereas all 4 mechanisms can lead to polarization transfer and sensitivity enhancement in solid state. So let us see a little bit more about how these mechanisms operate. First, let's talk about the Overhauser effect. Overhauser effect is actually a 2-spin effect. Overhauser effect can occur between 2 nuclei also. But what Overhauser effect we are talking about is one between an electron and a nucleus, say proton. So if we consider 2-spin system of which one is an electron and one is a nucleus, then there can be 4 different energy levels and 6 possible transitions. Of these possible 6 transitions, the ones which are shown in blue corresponds to a NMR transition, whereas those represented in red corresponds to an EPR transition. And these 4 transitions, if you look at the change in the total M value, that is 1 unit, and these are the allowed transitions in allowed transitions. So when we, whereas the 2 transitions which are shown in yellow and green, they are known as multiple quantum transitions and are quote unquote forbidden. So if you look at this green transition, the total change in the M value is 2 units, and it's known as the double quantum transition, whereas the one in yellow has a flip-flop transition. So the total change is 0, and hence is known as a 0 quantum transition. Now, to achieve an Overhauser effect, what we do is we are saturating the EPR transitions. Upon saturating the EPR transitions, the system will try to come back to equilibrium through relaxation processes. And the relaxation processes can take place either through double quantum processes or through 0 quantum. Now, if the double quantum transition is the leading mechanism for a relaxation, that will lead to a negative sensitivity enhancement in the NMR transition. Whereas if the 0 quantum transition leads to relaxation, then it will lead to a positive enhancement. Now, in reality, both these processes may be there in the system, and depending upon which one is the dominant mechanism, we may get a positive or a negative enhancement. And if we are terribly unlucky, it may happen that they cancel each other also. Now, again, solid effect is also a similar mechanism involving 2 spins, 1 electron and 1 nuclei. In presence of an electron-nuclear dipolar interaction, it is possible to excite the quote-unquote forbidden transitions. And if we do the dipolar, if we excite the double quantum transition, that will lead to a positive enhancement, whereas if we excite the zero quantum transition, that will lead to a negative enhancement. Unlike this Overholser effect and solid effect, the third effect, which is known as the cross effect, is a 3-spin process. This needs 2 electrons and 1 nuclei. And the condition for getting a cross effect is that the difference in the EPR transition frequency between these 2 electrons has to be equal to the nuclear transition frequency. Under that condition, of the 8 possible energy levels, these 2 energy levels become degenerate, and upon EPR excitation, the state mixing happens, and on irradiating the low field line, we get a negative enhancement, whereas on irradiating the high field line, we get a positive enhancement. Now, one thing, the fourth mechanism is known as the thermal mixing. That's a multi-spin effect, and it happens at extremely low temperatures and are not generally used. Now, one thing that must be clear by now is that to do the DNP, we need a radical in the system. But standard NMR samples are diamagnetic. They don't have free electrons in there. So we have to dope the sample with a free radical. To do solid effect or Overholser effect based DNP, we need monoradical, because this is a two spin effects based on an electron and a nucleus. So we have to use monoradicals. Whereas the cross effect needs 2 electrons, and not only that, it has to satisfy the cross effect condition. So there are radicals, biradicals, which has 2 electrons, and they are tailor-made to satisfy the cross effect condition that the difference in the EPR resonance frequencies should be equal to the NMR transitions frequency. There are a number of biradicals like totapol, amipol. These are all nitroxide-based biradicals that are used for cross effect based DNP. Now let's talk a little bit about a DNP spectrometer. Since a DNP experiments needs both microwave irradiation and RF irradiation, this is a combination of both NMR and EPR. So these experiments can be performed either based on an EPR system with additional RF electronics or on an NMR system with additional EPR electronics. Now, in magnetic resonance, a resonator or a cavity or a probe refers to that part of the spectrometer which delivers the microwave or the RF power to the sample and picks the signal that is coming from the sample and sends to the rest of the electronics for amplification and detection. Since the DNP experiment involves both RF and microwave irradiation, ideally we need these resonators or the probes to be double resonant to both the frequencies. So for example, here I'm showing a probe, a DNP probe, which is a double resonant cavity. And this one is a standard magic angle spinning probe modified for microwave irradiation. But this is resonant only to the NMR frequency, but not to the microwaves. The problem with double resonance cavity is that as we go to higher and higher frequency, the cavity size goes down. For example, at X band, which corresponds to an EPR frequency of 9 gigahertz and an NMR proton resonance frequency of close to 15 megahertz, we can use a NMR tube of sample size 4 millimeter. But by the time we reach W band, which is an NMR resonance frequency close to 145 megahertz, the tube size reduces to less than 1 millimeter. So as we go to higher and higher frequency, the cavity size goes down and becomes incredibly smaller. So when we do high field DNP, generally people tend to use only a DNP probe, which is resonant only to the NMR but not to the microwave radiation. Now here I am showing the picture of a W-band DNP spectrometer that we were using at IIT Madras. Now my work, which involves both solution state DNP as well as solid state DNP. First I will present our work on solution state room temperature DNP, Overhauser based fluorine DNP at XQ and W bands. As we have seen earlier, the double quantum processes, relaxation processes, leads to a negative enhancement. These double quantum processes are relaxation processes occurs when the dominant relaxation mechanism is dipolar. And in this plot where I'm showing the spectral density function as a the enhancement as a function of the spectral density function, you can see that as the field goes higher and higher, the dipolar enhancement goes down. Whereas in the absence of any leakage, the scalar interaction dominant enhancement, which is positive, remains almost the same. Of the various nuclei, protons generally give a dominant dipolar interaction and a negative sensitivity enhancement, whereas fluorines can give both scalar and dipolar based enhancements. So if you look at the proton enhancement at X band and W band on a sample of hexafluorobenzene mixture, you can see that we get a negative. This is the Boltzmann signal with the no DNP, the standard NMR spectrum, and this is the spectrum, the lower trace is with the DNP. So you can see that we get a sensitivity enhancement of approximately 60, which is negative. And as we go to higher field, the enhancement goes down. Whereas when we look at the exact same sample, but now we are looking at the fluorine signal, the enhancement at X and W bands remains almost the same. And actually, this is because the dipolar interaction goes down, but the scalar interaction almost remains the same. And if that was the case, we should have seen even more enhancement, but we are not seeing that. We are seeing almost the same. This is because the microwave power that was available at W band was only 100 milliwatt, whereas in X band, we had something like 5 watts. So if we had the same power at W band, this enhancement would have gone higher. So another feature, within the same molecule, different chemical shift positions can show different enhancements. For example, here we are showing the DNP enhanced spectrum of octafluorotoluene at W band. And you can see that this is the Boltzmann spectrum with no enhancement. Whereas if we use a radical, we are seeing enhancement and we are seeing a much better signal to noise at every site. However, when we are using nitroxide-based radicals like TEMBO or BBNO, all sites show negative enhancement, and the highest enhancement being observed at the CF3 position. Whereas when we are using a radical called TTBP, the CF3 still shows a negative enhancement, whereas the para and meta fluorines show a positive enhancement. And the enhancement factors at different positions are different. And now when we go to a radical called galvanoxyl, all sites show positive enhancement, and the site which was showing the least dipolar negative enhancement is now showing the highest positive scalar enhancement. And correspondingly, CF3 shows the least scalar enhancement, which had the highest dipolar enhancement. So these kind of difference in the enhancement factors at different sites within the same molecule is attributed to the difference in the polarizability of those sites. Now, again, one thing we have noticed from this is that those radicals which have a localized electron density tend to give us a better dipolar enhancement, whereas radicals which have a delocalized electron density, such as in galvanoxyl, shows scalar positive enhancements. Now, not only 1D NMR experiments, we have also done 2D experiments at X and XQ and W bands. using DNP. So for example, these are the standard COSY experiments at W band on a trifluorobenzene sample. And without DNP, we are only seeing the diagonal peaks. Diagonal peaks have the same chemical shift on both the dimensions, both frequency axes. And they don't give any special information other than the standard 1D NMR spectrum. But when we do the experiments with DNP, you can see that cross peaks are showing up, and these cross peaks, which have different chemical shifts on the two different axes, gives us the information that these two peaks, for example, are coupled or close to each other in the molecule. So with the DNP, we saw all the expected cross peaks, whereas without the DNP, we couldn't see them. Now, not only COSY experiment, we have also done other type of 2D NMR experiments known as SEXY and BISECT, etc. SEXY is also gives the same information as a COSY experiment, but now this is like a tilted COSY spectrum. For example, if you take this COSY spectrum and tilt it, it will appear something like that. And BISECT is an experiment that was developed in our lab to suppress the diagonals, because when the cross peaks are very close to the diagonals, sometimes we may not see those cross peaks, and in such situations it is better to suppress the diagonals, and this is an experiment where the diagonals will be suppressed. So with DNP, we were able to do all sorts of 2D NMR experiments and get the information in a very short time period. For example, these experiments were at the W band were collected within just half an hour, less than half an hour, with a sample volume of less than 2 microliters. And these experiments we could even do at the X-band frequency as well. So now I move on to the solid state DNP. Solid state DNP, my work was mainly on cross-effect based DNP, so we are exclusively talking about cross-effect DNP. Now, when we go to solid state, the electron spin relaxation times are pretty short, and to get a cross-effect based DNP, we need to have an electron spin relaxation time which is long enough to do this process. So typically, we have to go down to a very low temperature, something like 100 Kelvin or below, to do this cryogenic, to do this cross-effect based magic angle spinning solid state DNP. Now, when we go to such low temperature, some samples, for example, if they are biomolecular samples, they will not be able to tolerate such low temperature. If we are using, say, for example, proteins, they may get denatured at such cryogenic temperatures. So we have to cryoprotect our target molecule from this cryogenic temperature. So we have to use a DNP matrix, which is a mixture of glycerol, D2O, and water, typically, and there are other types of mixtures also available. We will use that and dope the radical in this sample, in this DNP matrix, and then add that to the target molecules, say for example a protein. Now, even if the target molecule is not temperature sensitive, we need to use this DNP matrix for the homogeneous distribution of the biradicals to get an efficient polarization transfer between the radical and the sample. So for example, for the magic angle spinning DNP, cross-effect DNP, this is how the sample will look like. We will have a DNP matrix with glycerol, deuterated glycerol, D2O, and H2O mixture, and then which contains the biradical and which also contains the molecule whose sensitivity needs to be enhanced. So this is our target molecule, this is our polarizing agent, and this is our matrix. And when we give the microwave irradiation, the EPR transitions in this biradical get excited, and the polarization is transferred through by spin diffusion through the protons to the target molecule. Now, since we have to do these experiments at cryogenic temperatures, we have to have special instrumentation. So what we are doing is we are either cooling a nitrogen gas or a helium gas down to 100 Kelvin. In case of helium, we can go down to 4 Kelvin, and that cooled gas is used to spin the solid state samples at the required spinning frequency. Now, this is the home-built DNP spectrometer that we had at MIT, which I was working on, and this is the NMR magnet. And when we are doing this high-field DNP, the standard solid-state devices which gives rise to microwaves are not enough. That power is not enough to do the high-field DNP. So we have to have special instruments called gyrotrons to have high-power, high-frequency microwave radiation. So here is the gyrotron, which is sitting inside this magnet. So gyrotron magnet is here. So in this spectrometer, we have two separate magnets, one NMR magnet and the gyrotron magnet. And the microwave that is generated is transmitted from the gyrotron to the NMR magnet through the waveguides, the yellow pieces shown here. And this is the probe which is inserted from the bottom, and the sample goes onto the top of the probe, which is sitting somewhere in the middle of the NMR magnet. The cooling system, which is often referred to as heat exchangers, are not shown in the picture. It is somewhere here, and the cold nitrogen gas is coming through these lines here and goes into the probe. Now, my work was mainly on developing transmission line probes for DNP. The standard solid-state NMR probes cannot be used for DNP experiments because they cannot handle this low temperature, and also it does not have the provision to do the microwave irradiation. So we have to have additional waveguides. So we have developed two balanced transmission line probes for magic angle spinning cryogenic DNP at 500 megahertz, which corresponds to an EPR frequency of 330 gigahertz. Now, these probes or the resonators are, the NMR probes are generally LC circuits, which tunes to the specific frequency. And based on how these tuning matching circuits are attached to the RF coil. So in this circuit diagram, which I'm showing here, this is the RF coil. Inside, when we are placing a sample onto the NMR magnet, inside this, just going inside this coil. And it is attached to two different capacitors, or sometimes to other inductors, to tune and match this circuit to the required frequency. Now, based on how this tuning matching circuit is attached to the RF coil, probes are classified into two types, namely locally tuned probes, in which the tuning matching circuit is directly attached to the RF coil, or remotely tuned probes. In this case, the RF coil and the tuning matching circuit is separated by a transmission line. Now, whether a probe is locally tuned or remotely tuned, we can classify them into two other types also, balanced or unbalanced. When we mean, what we mean by a balanced transmission line probe is, in that case, we will have an impedance node or a current maximum at the center of the RF coil. This is important for getting good RF homogeneity throughout the NMR coil and to do efficient polarization transfer in a magic angle spinning CP mass experiment. In an unbalanced probe, the one end of the coil will be going to the tuning matching circuit, whereas the other end will be grounded. But in case of a balanced transmission line probe, to enable this balancing process, we will have a symmetric circuit on either side of the coil and once this side is called the tuning matching side, and this side is known as the balancing side. And the balancing side at the end is grounded. Now, in our case, in NMR experiments, we may need to excite multiple frequencies at the same time. So we may need multiple channel probes. So the probes which we have developed are triple resonance or 3-channel probes corresponding to 3 different frequencies. So of the 2 probes that we have built, one was an HCN probe, whereas the other one was an HPN proton phosphorus and nitrogen probe. So in this diagram, circuit diagram, the 3 different colors represents the 3 different channels, and they are joined together at some point, and then it goes to the RF coil through a same transmission line. Now, in addition to the main impedance node at the center of the RF coil, in this circuit diagram which we have designed, there are two more impedance nodes, which are one on the balancing side and one on the tuning matching side. When we are giving an RF power, say for example, consider that this is the proton channel, for example. When we are giving RF power here, we are hoping that this will go through this line, reach here, and then goes to the RF coil. But it is also possible that instead of going like that, the whole power can get reflected back to the source, which is not good for the health of the spectrometer. Also, there is a chance that the power which you are giving here, instead of going to the coil, it will go to the other channels. So our aim is not to happen that. If that should not happen, we have to have these impedance nodes formed properly. If the impedance node is formed properly, when we give a power on a specific channel, that will come here at the center, but instead of going to those other channels, it will clearly go to the sample. Similarly, when the RF coil picks the signal that is coming from the sample, this has to come down and go to the tuned circuit, not to everywhere. So this means that this is called the isolation between the channels. The channel has to be isolated and it should tune to the required frequency. If the impedance nodes are formed properly, this will happen. And all these things are nice to say, but how do we ensure that these kinds of nodes are formed inside the probe? Once we build a probe, that is one piece of equipment, and there is no way to access these different points in the probe. Now, even if somehow we create an access there, how do we connect a measuring device to such a probe? There is no way that we can connect that. So in the previous designs where people were building balanced transmission line probes, this was mostly like a cut and paste job or like a trial and error method. But we have come up with that modular swappable design, which will enable us to have access to every required point in the probe, as well as we can connect these positions within the probe for characterization to an external device. For example, in this modular design, this part where the channels are separate is known as the bottom probe, and you can see the corresponding position in the probe. This is the bottom view of the bottom probe. The three channels are these, and they are connected together here. Similarly, the top probe, this is this part. This gets inserted into the magnet, and the sample comes in and sits here. And these two parts, the top and bottom probes, can be separated from each other and connected to an equivalent similar module with a different frequency. So every part in our probe is swappable. Another part which is swappable is the top portion of the probe, which we call as a sample chamber. Now, if you look closely, you can see the RF coil here. The sample comes in and sits there and spins. The gas, which is the nitrogen gas, is coming through these Teflon pieces to spin the sample at 80 or 100 Kelvin. Now, if you are buying a commercial probe, this this sample chamber corresponds to one particular sample size. For example, typically for magic angle spinning solid state experiments, we are using zirconia rotors of 4 millimeter to say something like 0.9 millimeter. So if you want to if you want to use a 4 millimeter rotor, you have to buy a 4 millimeter probe. And if you want to use say some other size, say like 1.3 millimeter, you have to buy a separate probe. But in our design, you don't have to have the whole probe separate. Instead, you can simply remove this sample chamber and replace it with another one with corresponding to a different sample size. And these particular ones which I am showing here is for 3.2 millimeter rotors. And we have the waveguide coming here, and it will irradiate the microwave directly onto the sample through this window. Now, these are all the parts of the probes. I'm just showing how we get so these are the bearing and drive and VT points, where we use the gases to cold nitrogen gas to spin the sample, and the sensors, the temperature sensor, the spin sensor, all those things are going to, all these are connected right here. Now, by this modular design, we have access to the different positions in the probe, but how do we still connect it to an external measurement device like a network analyzer? Usually these external measurement devices like a network analyzer or a scope, they are equipped with a connector which are either N-type or NC-type kind of connectors. How do we connect this to a probe? So we have developed a transmission line adapter which has N-type connector on one end and transmission line adapter, transmission line on the other side. So this part will mate with any part in the probe, and this part can be, this side can be connected to the measurement devices. So when we have standard electrical equipments, it is easy to characterize them at the low frequencies like 50 hertz or 60 hertz, which are the basic transmission frequencies, current transmission frequency, just by measuring the current or the voltage. But when we are at higher frequencies, it is not easy to measure the current or voltage. So instead, people are measuring special parameters known as scattering parameters, and there are many other parameters also. So we have exclusively used scattering parameter measurements using our to design our probe. So these, using the scattering parameters, we have used some simulation programs to come up with what should be the length of the transmission line and what should be the dimensions of the transmission line, and how can we accurately get the impedance nodes, etc. And based on that, we have come up with transmission lines which will give us this required properties for the probe. The details of this design are given in our paper. You can always look at that if you are interested. Now, of the two probes which we have built, the proton carbon nitrogen probe was completely done, characterized, and we have done a number of experiments on using that probe, and I will show the results shortly. The second probe that I built was almost done, but of the 3 channels, proton and phosphorus channels were working very well, and I could collect some preliminary data, including some DNP experiments. However, the nitrogen channel was not up to the mark, so somebody else is working on that right now. But now I will show the results that we obtained on our finished probe, which is the proton carbon nitrogen probe. Now, before moving on to the results, I would like to talk some about the applications of DNP. DNP experiments are used both in material science as well as in bio-related subjects. The main advantage of DNP is that it can give much better sensitivity enhancement. So the experiments which requires a very long time otherwise can be done in very short experiment times. For example, here I'm showing some of the materials applications which I have taken from literature. So this is a Oberholzer based DNP spectrum, magic angle spinning DNP spectrum on a mesoporous alumina sample, and different types of aluminum sites within that kind of sample could be detected using the DNP experiments. One of the main application of DNP in material science is to detect low concentration species. For example, species which is only on the surface. So many people in catalysis tend to surface coat their catalyst with molecules to improve the catalytic properties of their sample. Often it is difficult to detect those species using using NMR, because the sample is only on the surface, so the concentration is not good enough to detect by standard NMR spectroscopy. But with the sensitivity enhancement available with DNP, people were able to detect such things. That kind of DNP NMR experiments are known as DNP SENS, DNP surface enhanced spectroscopy. Now, here I'm showing one application study that I have taken from literature to study the core shell structure of a nanoparticle. So this is a tin based nanoparticle. These nanoparticles were characterized using Morse-Bohr spectroscopy. So from the Morse-Bohr, they were able to detect that there was two types of tin oxides in this nanoparticle. One was SNO, the other was SNO2. But they were not able to specifically say how these nanoparticle is constituted, like whether the tin SNO and SN2 is mixed up, or is it like a different shells or not. Now they have used DNP to find out this structure. For example, what they did is in surface enhanced DNP, because the polarization is transferred only to the surface species, only those in the surface species will be detected properly. And in NMR, SNO and SNO2 give different chemical shapes for the corresponding tin spectrum. So when they did the DNP experiment, they did not see any NMR signal at the SNO position, but they saw a good signal at the SNO2 position, which indicates that the nanoparticle has a core shell structure where the inner core is SNO and the outer surface is the SNO2. They were proved that further by doing 2D NMR, by doing the correlation between the SNO2 on the surface with the nanoparticle. They will use some stabilizing agents on the surface with the protons of that surface capping agents. So they were able to show that clearly. So these are some of the applications that I have taken from literature. But in Bob's group, where I was working, our main focus was on biomolecular DNP. So all our experiments, my experiments, are on biomolecular samples. For biomolecular samples, also people have used DNP to characterize peptides, membrane proteins, amyloid fibrils, nucleic acid, etc. So this is one of the study that we have taken using our home-built probe, is an RNA sample. These RNAs have these nucleic acids, and you can see that this is a microwave on-off comparison. When the microwave is off, the standard NMR spectrum does not show many signals, but when the microwave is on with DNP, we are able to see all the nitrogens on all four nucleic acids in the RNA. And not only that, just 1D experiment, we could also do 2D correlation experiments. In this particular case, the correlation is between the carbon and the nitrogens on the nucleic acids. So we saw all the cross space that were expected between the 4 different types of nucleic acids present in this particular RNA. Now, another sample which we studied was called a needle sample. It's an 83 amino acid protein, amino acid with 83 protein with 83 amino acids in its sequence. So here I'm just showing the carbon-carbon correlation experiments. So here when usually people do the carbon-carbon experiments, the correlation experiments, which are, there are a number of them. This is a particular experiment called DAR. It shows which carbon is coupled to which. And this is a solid state NMR experiment. So it does not mean that there is a J coupling between them. They are bonded, but they are through space interaction. So which atoms, which carbons are close to which other carbons in space. So for example, this particular carbon peak, which I am showing here, is coming from isoleucine. It can be clearly identified from the chemical shift and also how many peaks it is showing up. So isoleucine has, I forgot the exact structure, but so many carbons. So if you see that many peaks there, you can clearly identify, oh, this is isoleucine, like that. So similarly, you can easily identify all the type of amino acids present in that particular protein. However, the problem is to get the DNP enhancement, we have to go down to lower and lower temperature. And you can, as you can see here, at 220 Kelvin, when the microwave is off, this is how the spectrum looks like. But as I go down in temperature, the enhancement keeps going up and up. We get more and more signal, but the price we pay in getting that sensitivity enhancement is also clear from the spectrum, is that the resolution goes down. Means that, okay, those peaks which are far away from the others can be easily identified, but those who are closer here, if you look at that, many peaks can be clearly seen separately, whereas in the DNB enhanced spectrum, all of them become so broad that the resolution is lost and it is difficult to identify the amino acids from a DNB spectrum. Now, this particular spectrum is one of the best resolved spectrum that we could achieve. So if you can imagine what will be the situation with other kind of proteins. And this kind of good or comparatively good resolution is attributed to the rigid structure of the molecules. So when we do a standard magic angle spinning DNP, we are using this DNP matrix to cryoprotect the sample. And often all these protein molecules dissolve in that DNP juice. And if you speak technically, these are not crystalline solid state NMR spectrum, rather these are frozen liquids. And that's what we are doing. So if we can, instead of doing that, if we can keep the molecules as crystals, we can improve the resolution. Another way to improve the resolution is to spin the sample faster. So there is a problem when we are spinning the samples at low temperature. For example, when we are spinning a 3.2 millimeter rotor, we can spin it at up to 24 kilohertz at room temperature. But as we go down in temperature, the nitrogen gas, the density of the nitrogen gas goes higher and higher, and the frequency of the sound goes down. Now, when the rotor spins supersonic, it tend to crash. So we have to keep the rotor below the speed of sound. And the same 3.2 millimeter rotor, which could spin up to 24 kilohertz at room temperature, can spin the best at 12 kilohertz at 100 Kelvin. So we have a spinning limitation when we are doing this DNP experiments. If we go to smaller and smaller rotors, then of course we can spin faster. And this is an example just to show using a commercial spectrometer, 800 megahertz DNB spectrometer using a 1.3 millimeter rotor, we could spin faster and get the resolution back. However, to spin fast, then we need to have small rotors and all those stuff. Our home-built system did not have a small rotor. We had only a 3.2 millimeter rotor. So the other option is to modify the sample to make it a real crystalline protein rather than using a frozen protein solution to do the solid state NMR. So the approach we used was, we used a protein called hen-egg white lysozyme, and in crystallography, it is well known that we can cryoprotect such protein samples by cross-linking them. What we mean by cross-linking is that we are essentially making a polymer of the protein by forming a shift base between the amino groups of the lysine residues and a glutaraldehyde molecule. So what I did was we made the protein, first we crystallized the protein and then cross-linked it. Once we cross-link it, it forms the shift base, and that's why the color changes to yellow. And once the crystals are cross-linked, it does not dissolve in the DNB juice anymore. So it remains as crystalline at the low temperature also. So we hope to get better resolution in such samples. And this is the result we got on using our home-built probe. The 1D spectrum, this is a nitrogen 1D spectrum with DNP. When the microwave was off, there was hardly any signal, but with the microwave on, we could get an enhancement of say 115 on the backbone nitrogen signals. Now, this sample was in protein NMR. Generally, when we do protein NMR, people do labeling. They label both carbon and nitrogen to do experiments. But this particular sample was labeled only with nitrogen. There was no C13 labeling. But still, with the sensitivity available with DNP, we could collect a 2D spectrum where we got a correlation between the carbon and the nitrogen 15. And this experiment was not that long. It was just 2 days experiments. So without DNP, we could have spent months to get such a spectrum. So in summary, what I was trying to tell you is that DNP is a method to improve the sensitivity of NMR. And we have done both solution state overhoser based DNP, and we could see differential DNP enhancements for fluorine. And we have built 2 balanced transmission line probes for DNP. And with our design at 500 megahertz, on a standard sample, the best sensitivity enhancement we achieved was 180. And we introduced cross-linking as a potential method to improve the resolution in DNP, magic anchor spinning DNP experiments. With that, I would like to conclude and thank some people. First of all, I would like to thank Professor NC and Chandra Kumar for introducing me to DNP and NMR. All the solid-state DNP experiments was done at Professor Bob Griffin's lab at MIT. I'd like to thank Bob for giving me the opportunity to work with him, and also Dr. Marcel Rees and Dr. Chen Yang, who worked with me in the development of the probes. And also I would like to thank Penn State University, the NMR facility at Penn State University. That's where I'm working now. We don't have a DNP system at Penn State right now. We are trying to we have already submitted a proposal to NSF. Hopefully it will get funded soon. Then I would like to continue with the DNP experiments. As of now, I'm doing some standard solution state and solid state NMR experiments at Penn State. Thank you everyone for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you, Christy. We would take 1 or 2 questions if there are any.
Okay.
Anyone? There was somebody who raised the hand, Roshan Regius. Roshan, is it hand raised without? Sorry.
I think it was a mistake.
By mistake.
Okay. Christy, yeah, I just wanted to ask you something, but maybe we can have a discussion later. So your DNP, is it a wide bore? You require a wide bore, or is it just a narrow bore instrument?
It was just
probe?
wide bore, but it was wider than the standard Bruker wide bore. It was 108 millimeter, 108 millimeter.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right.
Bruker one is, I think,
okay. I also didn't know that you worked with Marcel. I mean, Marcel is a good friend of mine. He knows me very well.
Yeah, I worked with him. He was the one who started this, but then he left. So I took over.
Okay. Good. Sunil sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. There is an announcement from Dr. Sunil Kumar PN. Please listen.
Yeah, good evening, all. So there is a small announcement. Actually, it is a request to those participants who are not still members of this society. Please join this society as a member. We have different types of memberships: student memberships, individual membership, then lifetime membership, then corporate membership. You choose according to your interest. And also, please circulate or convey this message to your colleagues, friends, and students. So you can contact us through our email, Magnetic Resonance Society Kerala @gmail.com. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. I welcome Dr. Ani Deepthi, University of Kerala, Trivandrum, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Good evening to all. Thus, we are the fag end of the online inaugural function of the Magnetic Resonance Society Kerala, MRSK. On behalf of all the executive committee members, it is my pleasure to thank the people behind the success of this function. Professor Shankaran Subramanian, Adjunct Professor IIT Madras and President of the National Magnetic Resonance Society of India, is also our honorary member of our society. We are grateful to you, sir, for inaugurating MRSK by providing an insight into the multidisciplinary aspects of magnetic resonance spectroscopy. Thank you very much, sir, and we request your full-fledged support for our activities. Dr. Christy George from Pennsylvania State University has enlightened the inaugural function by her keynote lecture on dynamic nuclear polarization enhanced NMR. We express our sincere thankfulness to Dr. Christy for her lecture and presence. Special thanks to Professor N. Chandrakumar for his gracious presence today, and we are all blessed, sir, to have you with us today. The executive committee would also like to thank all our life members whose active participation is solicited in future also. And many thanks to the faculty and student members for their participation, which is also sought in future. And other than the members, few other students or faculty might have joined this session. So thank you all for your presence. And last but not the least, the committee would also like to thank all the students of IIRBS and Chemical Sciences and University for helping us to organize this event. So wish you all a safe and happy weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. With this, we have come to an end of this function. And to conclude, a good event never ends in the world. They only take a pause and keep us waiting for the next. Hoping for future endeavors. Thank you all.
Congratulations on a lovely show. Congratulations to all concerned.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
So I did my cutting, the hair cutting. You asked me about the screw cut, right? I go.
Did it yourself? It shows.
I don't have much. I don't have much there anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Oh, that makes two of us. But I'm not yet
You
brave
have a
enough
lot.
to cut my own hair. I request my wife to help me.
All right.
I was a sight until about 10 days ago.
Oh, okay.
Wonderful again, Vinesh. Excellent. Congratulations to everyone concerned. Lovely
Thank you,
show.
sir.
I think you
need your
guys
help.
have been. Nothing could be more pleasurable to me than to contribute in any possible way that you might wish me to. I think you are much bolder than probably most other parts of this country. I don't believe I'm aware of any other magnetic resonance society from any individual part of the country.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
I
you.
think probably Kerala would be the first unit, which is a state-wise. Professor Subramanian may have more statistics on this. Are there any state units so far, sir?
I don't think so.
Yeah, so congratulations. I mean, you guys are really pioneering this. Wonderful. Wonderful for starters. But of course, it's always a challenge to keep the activity going and grow it from strength to strength, which I'm sure with your commitment, you guys will do it. Congrats once again.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it is a problem. I mean, it is not a problem. It is a challenge. Continue doing it, and also that we have a lot of NMRs here in the state. So we and of course we who are doing magnetic resonance, they would like to have students also. So
Yeah,
it's
I
also
know.
one way to motivate.
I know. Yeah, I know.
All of them who comes for NMR just I know NMR. I knew how to measure. I mean, I don't know. They don't know how to measure probably, but they know how to interpret organic spectra. That's the problem, and that we need to give them a little more than that.
Sure. Yeah. It's a great way to try and do that.
Yeah. Okay, sir. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Have a nice weekend. Rest of
Thank
the
you,
week.
guys. Thank you, guys. Yeah. All the best to
Thank
you.
you, sir.
Congratulations. Bye.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Recording stop ചെയ്താലോ?
Okay.
Exited.
Yeah.
Also, those who have not been a member, please